John Wayne Gacy. To some, he was just a name in the neighborhood. A man who ran a contracting business, PDM maintenance, painting, decorating, maintenance. He was a guy who got involved. He joined the JCs. He even directed the Polish Constitution Day parade. He seemed ambitious. He seemed like a joiner. A regular guy, really. Someone you might wave to on the street, or hire to fix up your house. He built things, or so it appeared. He shook hands with local politicians. He smiled readily. Chicago was his city, his hunting ground, though no one knew it then. He seemed woven into its very fabric, an ordinary, unassuming thread in a vast, complex tapestry. Nothing about him screamed danger. At least not on the surface, not to the unsuspecting eye, but the surface, as it so often is, was a meticulously crafted lie. A carefully constructed and maintained illusion. Beneath the veneer of the hard-working businessman, the community-minded citizen, something truly monstrous was stirring, was growing. A profound darkness festered there, carefully hidden from the world, concealed behind a mask of utter normalcy. He lived not one life, but two. One was lived in the bright light of day, filled with mundane tasks and public appearances. The other was lived in the deepest, most terrifying shadows. This second life was his most guarded secret, a horrifying, deadly secret that would eventually come to define him, eclipsing everything else he had ever pretended to be. The contrast could not have been starker. How does an individual manage to maintain such a flawless, such an intricate disguise for so long? John Wayne Gacy, it turned out, was a chilling master of this dark art. He was not some shadowy recluse, cut off from society, lurking in the fringes. Quite the opposite, in fact. He actively craved social acceptance. He yearned for respectability. He immersed himself in his community. He joined various clubs and organizations. He diligently organized local events. He even rose to the position of a Democratic precinct captain, a role that brought him into contact with many people. He was photographed famously with then First Lady Rosalynn Carter in 1978. He methodically built a formidable wall of respectability around himself, brick by careful brick. This carefully cultivated public persona was, without a doubt, his most effective and insidious weapon. It served to deflect any potential suspicion. It made the unthinkable, the unimaginable seem utterly impossible when associated with his name. Who, after all, would ever suspect the friendly, outgoing contractor down the street? The jovial man who generously volunteered his time, dressing up as Pogo the Clown for local charity functions? The seemingly dedicated community leader? When the first faint whispers of something being amiss began to circulate, they were likely dismissed quickly by many. It simply couldn't be him. People like John Gacy, people so visible and involved, just don't do things like that. Or so the prevailing belief went. The name John Wayne Gacy is now irrevocably synonymous with a unique and particularly chilling brand of horror. It's not just about the act of murder itself, as heinous as that is. It's about the profound and calculated betrayal of trust. It's about the grotesque perversion of innocence, the twisting of something good into a tool for evil. The sheer number of his confirmed victims is staggering, undeniably placing him among the most prolific and monstrous serial killers in the annals of American history. He didn't just extinguish lives, he systematically shattered a fundamental sense of safety and security for an entire community, and indeed for many, far beyond it. He forced people to question the familiar faces they encountered every single day. And then there was the location of his atrocities. His own home, 8213 West Summerdale Avenue in Norwood Park Township, a quiet suburb of Chicago. This seemingly ordinary house became an infamous house of horrors, a place of unimaginable suffering. The crawl space beneath its floors, a damp and dark void, was transformed into a makeshift tomb for dozens of his victims. This wasn't a killer who struck randomly in dark, deserted alleys and then fled into the anonymity of the night. He brought his victims into his personal space, into the very heart of his carefully constructed world, the same world where he projected an image of normalcy. The disturbing intimacy of this choice adds yet another layer of profound dread, of almost inconceivable cruelty. The bodies were so close, hidden just out of sight. John Wayne Gacy Jr. arrived in the world on March 17, 1942, St. Patrick's Day, Chicago, Illinois. A city of broad shoulders, a city of industry, a city that would unknowingly become the backdrop for his future unspeakable acts. He was the second child, the only son of John Stanley Gacy Sr. and Marion Elaine Robinson Gacy. On the surface, theirs was a working-class family like so many others in post-Depression wartime America. They lived on the northwest side of Chicago. They were of Polish and Danish heritage. It was a world that expected conformity, that valued hard work, that held certain expectations for a boy. Expectations young John would struggle with profoundly from his earliest days. But beneath this veneer of mid-century normalcy, John's early years were marked by significant challenges. He was not a robust child. He was diagnosed with a congenital heart defect, a murmur that would follow him, limiting his physical activities at times. Then, around the age of 4 or 5, a playground accident, a swing set, a head injury. This incident is believed by some to have potentially triggered blood clots in his brain. By age 11, he began experiencing blackouts, episodes of lost time that were unpredictable and frightening. These weren't just physical ailments, they became points of contention, sources of shame, particularly under the harsh gaze of his father. Under a father's shadow, the weight of abuse. The dominant force in John Wayne Gacy Jr.'s childhood, the architect of much of his early pain, was unquestionably his father. John Stanley Gacy Sr. was a man of harsh discipline, a man with a volatile temper, often fueled by alcohol. He was an auto mechanic, a blue-collar worker who held deeply traditional views on masculinity, on what a son should be. And in his eyes, young John consistently, painfully, fell short. His father wielded authority like a weapon, creating an atmosphere of fear that choked the air in their Chicago home. He demanded respect but offered little in return, especially to his only son, who seemed to embody everything he disdained. The abuse was not merely occasional, it was a relentless barrage, both physical and psychological. John Sr. would mock his son's health problems, dismissing his blackouts as mere attention-seeking. He derided him for not being tough enough, for being too close to his mother, calling him a sissy, a mama's boy. The verbal assaults were constant, chipping away at any nascent sense of self-worth. And then there was the physical violence, the strap, the belt, his fists. These were tools of control, methods of enforcing his rigid, unforgiving standards. The pain was real, the fear was constant. There was no escaping his father's judgment, his disappointment, his explosive anger. The search for self, a fractured adolescence. Adolescence is a turbulent time for most. For John Wayne Gacy Jr., it was a period of acute internal struggle, lived under the long, dark shadow of his father's abuse and his own mounting insecurities. Navigating the social complexities of high school, the pressures to fit in, to define oneself, was an immense challenge. He wasn't a standout student academically, nor was he a natural athlete, an area his father would have undoubtedly valued. He likely found it difficult to forge genuine, trusting friendships. How could he, when his home life had taught him that trust was a prelude to pain, that affection was conditional and easily withdrawn? He was an outsider looking in, desperate for acceptance. Compounding these difficulties was the burgeoning awareness of his own sexuality. In an era when homosexuality was widely condemned as a perversion, a sin, even a mental illness, any feelings he might have had in that direction would have been terrifying. His father's taunts, his accusations of being queer, only intensified this internal torment. The need for secrecy became paramount. He had to construct a facade of normalcy not just for his peers, but for his own survival within his family. This constant vigilance, this need to hide such a fundamental part of himself, must have been exhausting, isolating, and profoundly damaging to his developing psyche. The darkness erupts. January 1972. The year 1972 marked a horrifying descent. For John Wayne Gacy, it was a critical turning point, the moment his darkest impulses, long simmering beneath a carefully constructed facade, finally boiled over into deadly action. Outwardly, he was building a life. He had remarried in 1972. He was trying to re-establish his contracting business, PDM Maintenance. He was even starting to get involved in local community activities again. This image of striving respectability, however, was a fragile mask. Internally, a storm was gathering. The pressures he felt, whether from his past, his troubled marriage, or his own twisted desires, were pushing him towards an abyss from which there would be no return. He was about to cross an irrevocable line. The first life he is known to have taken was that of Timothy Jack McCoy. It was early January, a cold Chicago winter. McCoy was just 16 years old, a youth from Nebraska who had reportedly run away from home. He was vulnerable, alone, seeking something, perhaps adventure, perhaps just a place to be. How Gacy encountered him isn't entirely clear, perhaps a chance meeting, an offer of shelter or a meal. Once McCoy was inside Gacy's home, the dynamic shifted irrevocably. The initial act of violence may have been less practiced, less refined than the horrors that would follow. But it was no less final. Gacy had taken a human life. The ultimate taboo had been broken. As John Wayne Gacy continued his descent, his methods for ensnaring his victims became chillingly refined. He was a predator, and he developed a playbook, a series of tactics designed to lure unsuspecting young men and boys into his deadly trap. His contracting business, PDM Maintenance, became an essential part of this sinister strategy. It provided him with a legitimate front, a plausible reason to interact with young men seeking employment. He would offer them jobs, painting, construction work, odd jobs around his house. For many vulnerable youths, often unemployed or new to the Chicago area, the promise of work, of earning some cash, was an irresistible lure. They saw an opportunity, not a monster. Gacy's charm was a potent weapon, meticulously honed over years of seeking approval and manipulating perceptions. The people-pleaser persona, once a defense mechanism rooted in his abusive childhood, was now twisted into a predatory tool. He could be affable, engaging, and seemingly trustworthy. He knew how to build a quick rapport, how to make his targets feel at ease, even safe in his presence. He preyed on their trust, their youthful optimism, their simple desire for a friendly face or a helping hand. He appeared to be an employer, a mentor, even a friend. This calculated deception was the critical first step in his horrifying process of victim acquisition. He made them believe he was on their side. Once a victim was successfully lured to Gacy's unassuming ranch-style house at 8213 West Summerdale Avenue in Norwood Park, the true horror would unfold. The house itself, with its tidy lawn and suburban facade, became a central character in this gruesome saga. It was a place of terrifying secrets, a monument to deception. For the young men and boys who crossed its threshold, often filled with hope for a job or simply a moment of connection, it became their prison, their torture chamber, and ultimately, their tomb. The moment that front door closed behind them, sealing them inside with Gacy, their fate was almost certainly sealed. The ordinary became the site of the unimaginable. Inside, stripped of their freedom and any illusion of safety, the victims faced Gacy's unrestrained sadism. He was not just a killer. He was a sexual predator who derived gratification from the complete domination and violation of others. Once restrained, often with the deceptive handcuffs, his victims were subjected to brutal sexual assaults. Their terror, their helplessness, seemed to fuel his depravity. This was the core of his dark compulsion, the ultimate expression of the power he craved, a power he had been denied and warped by throughout his early life. The violation was absolute, an attack on their bodies, their dignity, their very humanity, before their lives were extinguished. For 6 long, terrifying years, from 1972 until his eventual arrest in December 1978, John Wayne Gacy operated with horrifying impunity. During this period, he lured, assaulted, and murdered at least 33 young men and boys. The sheer number is staggering, a testament to his predatory drive and his chilling ability to evade detection. Dozens of families were left wondering, searching, praying for news of their missing sons, brothers, and friends. The Chicago area became his hunting ground, yet the community remained largely oblivious to the monster meticulously operating within its very fabric. He was a phantom, hiding in the most audacious place imaginable, plain sight. His ability to avoid suspicion for so long was a masterclass in deception. His carefully cultivated public image served as an almost impenetrable shield. He was the successful businessman, the owner of PDM Construction. He was the active community member involved with the JCs, organizing parades, even becoming a Democratic precinct captain. He was Pogo the Clown, bringing supposed joy to children. Who would suspect such a man of unspeakable crimes? Law enforcement, too, failed to connect the scattered missing persons reports. In an era before widespread DNA technology and sophisticated data analysis, the disappearances were often treated as isolated incidents, runaways, or cases with no clear links. Gacy exploited these systemic blind spots. The community pillar business, politics, and public acclaim. John Wayne Gacy was, to many in his suburban Chicago enclave, the very picture of a self-made man. His contracting business, PDM maintenance, painting, decorating, and maintenance, was more than just a livelihood. Pogo's painted grin, the innocence of a clown. Perhaps the most infamous, most chilling component of John Wayne Gacy's elaborate disguise was his alter ego, Pogo the Clown. He designed the character himself. The charisma of a killer. An untouchable facade. John Wayne Gacy's ability to deceive was not solely reliant on his business acumen or his clown costume. At the core of his perfect disguise was a potent, manipulative charisma. The date was December 11, 1978, a Monday. For 15-year-old Robert Peast, it was meant to be a step towards a new job. He worked at the Nissan pharmacy in Des Plaines, Illinois. He had plans to meet a local contractor that evening. The contractor, a man named John Wayne Gacy, had offered him a summer job. Robert was excited. He spoke to his mother, Elizabeth Piest, from the pharmacy, telling her about the meeting. On December 12th, the day after Robert Peast vanished, Des Plaines police officers Lieutenant Joseph Kozenchak and Patrolman Greg Beto paid their first visit to 8213 West Summerdale Avenue, the home of John Wayne Gacy. Their initial interactions with Gacy were, on the surface, unremarkable. Gacy appeared cooperative. He invited them in. He answered their questions. He was the charming, affable businessman. He admitted to speaking with Robert Peast about a potential job. Section 4, The Crawl Space Confession, Horror Unveiled. As the evidence mounted, John Wayne Gacy was brought in for intensive questioning. He was no longer the charming, cooperative contractor. He was a prime suspect in a multiple disappearance investigation. The pressure from seasoned interrogators was relentless. They confronted him with the items found in his home, with the inconsistencies in his stories, with his prior conviction. Gacy's carefully constructed facade, the one he had maintained for years, began to fracture. He became agitated, evasive. Section 1, The People vs. John Wayne Gacy, A City Demands Justice. The arrest of John Wayne Gacy in December 1978 sent shockwaves not just through Chicago, but across the entire nation. The gruesome discoveries beneath his home on Summerdale Avenue dominated headlines for weeks, painting a portrait of unimaginable evil. On February 6, 1980, the trial of John Wayne Gacy commenced at the Cook County Courthouse. He faced an unprecedented 33 counts of murder. This was, at the time, the highest number of murder charges ever brought against a single individual in United States history. The sheer scale of his alleged crimes promised a legal battle of epic proportions. Section 2. The Mind of a Monster Insanity on Trial. The core of Gacy's defense rested on the assertion that he was legally insane at the time of the killings. His lawyers, Sam Amarante and Robert Mata, argued that Gacy suffered from a dissociative identity disorder, or multiple personality disorder, as it was commonly known then. They contended that distinct, separate personalities, including one named Jack Hanley, and perhaps even aspects of Pogo the Clown, were responsible for the abductions, assaults, and murders. Gacy himself, they claimed, was unaware or had no control over these other entities that allegedly inhabited his mind. This defense aimed to paint him not as a calculating killer, but as a man tormented by a fractured psyche, a victim of his own mental illness. To support this insanity plea, the defense called upon a series of psychiatrists and psychological experts. These experts testified about Gacy's troubled childhood, the alleged abuse he suffered, and the potential impact on his mental development. After 6 weeks of harrowing testimony, graphic evidence, and intense legal arguments, the case went to the jury on March 12, 1980. The 12 jurors retreated to deliberate, carrying the weight of an entire city's expectation for justice. They had listened to the horrifying details of 33 murders. They had seen the gruesome photographs from the crawl space. They had heard Gacy's own chilling words, both in his confession and on the witness stand. The evidence against him was, by any measure, overwhelming. The central question they had to decide was not whether he had killed, but whether he was legally responsible for those killings, or if his mind was so diseased he could not be held accountable. The deliberation was surprisingly swift. The name John Wayne Gacy casts a long, cold shadow. It is more than just a name in the grim annals of true crime. It represents a profound and lasting shock to the American psyche. The sheer scale of his atrocities, the methodical cruelty, the horrifying deception. These elements combined to create a story that transcended the typical news cycle. It became a national nightmare. The initial disbelief slowly gave way to a sickening horror. This was not a monster from fiction. This was a man. The story of John Wayne Gacy is, at its core, a stark and deeply unsettling confrontation with the nature of evil itself. It forces us to peer into an abyss of human depravity that defies easy explanation. How could one individual be capable of such sustained, pitiless cruelty? Where does such darkness originate? Is it born or is it made? These are ancient questions that philosophers and theologians have wrestled with for centuries. Gacy's crimes brought these questions out of the abstract and into the horrifying reality of a suburban Chicago home. His legacy is a chilling testament to the capacity for profound evil that can exist within a human being, hidden from view. The psychological enigma that was John Gacy continues to perplex and disturb. His ability to compartmentalize his life was nothing short of astounding in the most horrific sense. He could meticulously plan and execute the torture and murder of young men. He could then bury their bodies beneath his home. And then, he could step out his front door and resume his life as a respected contractor, an active community member, a jovial clown. This chilling facade of complete normalcy, maintained over years of prolific killing, raises profound questions about the human mind. How could he switch between these personas so seamlessly? Was it madness, or a terrifying form of self-control? Beyond the monstrous figure of John Wayne Gacy himself, it is crucial to remember the 33 young men and boys whose lives he so brutally extinguished. Each one was an individual with hopes, dreams, and families who loved them. Their stories are the true heart of this tragedy. For their families, the passage of decades has not erased the pain, the grief, or the haunting questions. Even after Gacy's execution, their loss remains a profound and permanent wound. The sensational headlines often focus on the killer, but it is the victims and the enduring sorrow of those they left behind that demand our most solemn remembrance and deepest empathy. Their voices were silenced, but their memory must not be. The search for complete closure in the Gacy case remains an ongoing endeavor. Even now, years after his conviction and execution, some of his victims remain unidentified. They are nameless faces in old photographs, John Does buried without their true identities known. For their families, who may still be searching, still hoping against hope, or simply living with the agony of not knowing, this lack of resolution is an added layer of torment. Dedicated investigators driven by a commitment to these forgotten boys continue to work tirelessly. They pursue every lead, however faint, in the hope of bringing names to the nameless and offering some measure of peace to those who have waited so long for answers. Please like, comment, and subscribe for more content.